Today we're looking at the full rules for Necron command protocols, talking about how they'll affect the army and which ones I think are strongest. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we've been covering the news of the new Necron release as it comes out. Today we're talking about some details from the new leaked Necron command protocols, and I'd just like to say a big thank you to the chap who sent me the details of these. It seems someone's already got their hands on the Necron Codex, and it's really good to learn a few more tasty details before the release drops. As well as what we already knew, there's a few more restrictions as to the use of the command protocols, and there's 6 different protocols, each one divided into 2 parts. So let's start out by how command protocols actually work then. It seems they're basically an army-wide special rule, but it only works if the entire army is from the same dynasty. So it's sort of your reward for going one pure dynasty of Necrons, rather than mixing and matching between the 2 strongest, which could be a strength in itself, say putting your melee units in the Novok dynasty, and putting any ranged units in Mefrit. So every unit with a dynasty keyword does have to be in the same dynasty, though this excludes Khatan shards, dynastic agents, and unaligned units such as fortifications. So you still get command protocols even if you have some of them. Next, you must have a Necron noble as the warlord, so that would be a lord or overlord, I believe, or one of their named characters. I believe that's a new keyword for 9th edition. Some of the Necron units have it. I think the Cryptex and other similar things like that will not have it. Again, a good reason to have the fluffy choice as your warlord. Then there must be at least one Necron noble on the battlefield the turn for the command protocols to activate. I don't believe that this has to be the same one as the warlord, it can be a different one. And finally, and possibly most restrictively, each unit must be within 6 inches of a non-Khatan character model to be able to activate their command protocols. While I can see this being kind of fluffy in the way that the Lords and Cryptex will be directing their troops about the battlefield, it is just a bit restrictive, meaning that if your Necron units go off on their own to do their own thing, then you're not going to be getting these command protocols. The Necron army has 6 different command protocols to be able to take effect in-game, and each one has 2 different buffs within it. When you get to the turn you select one of them. You'll cycle through those command protocols in a fixed order. You actually choose command protocols after deployment has been done, but before the first turn begins. You can either secretly note down the order that you're going to be using the command protocols on your army roster, or if you have the Necron data cards, then you can lay them down face down on the table and draw them one at a time in your determined order to show which one that you have each turn. To be honest, that seems like a fairly easy way of recording them, and that will be a positive to having the Necron data cards around. The command protocols are drawn at the start of each battle round, which does mean that they'd be straight into effect even on turn 1, even if it's not the Necron turn first, which is a positive. And when you reach that protocol, you've got to choose one of the 2 directives to determine which buffs your army could be potentially getting. If you're using one of the big names dynasties rather than a custom dynasty, such as Sotek or Saracen or something like that, then they each have a buffed version of one of the command protocols, and they'll get both benefits when you reach that one. For example, Sotek has the Protocol of the Conquering Tyrant, so when they reach that one, they'll get both benefits. Finally, they do mention that if the game happens to be a mission that goes on for longer than 5 turns, then the last command protocol continues to take effect. So you'll basically only ever use 5 of these command protocols, you'll have to drop one each game. So far so good then, a little bit complicated to organise at the start of the game, and a few slightly annoying restrictions, but it could be pretty useful to get some essentially free rules for the army that the Necrons didn't have before. Let's talk about what these command protocols can actually do for us then. So first of all, we have Protocol of the Eternal Guardian. This one's the one that Nihilak get both parts of, and you have the choice between either getting light cover if you didn't normal move, advance or fall back, so any Necron units that remain stationary will get +1 to their saving throws. That one really seems quite decent, could be pretty useful on things like Doomsday Arcs or Doomstalkers, things that aren't going to want to move anyway. The other directive is if you're going to be engaged by enemy melee troops. If an enemy unit declares a charge against a unit with this protocol that isn't already in melee, you can either hold steady or set to defend as if you had heavy cover. Hold steady will give you 5+ overwatch if you use the stratagem, and set to defend will give you +1 to your hit rolls when your unit strikes back. A fairly useful durability buff. It could almost be worth putting it first and gambling that you go second, because if you do, then essentially your entire army will gain light cover, which is a really powerful defensive buff turn 1. If you did win the roll off the first turn though, then it might be a little bit less useful, as a lot of your units will likely want to move. Next up we have the Protocol of the Sudden Storm. I believe that this is the Nephrek one, the ones who can teleport a bit. This one you either get +1 inch to your movement of all your units, or you can do actions and still shoot at the same time. A bit weaker I think, +1 movement is never bad, but it's hardly going to change the world. which I guess the doing actions and still shooting could be fairly useful if you are playing certain missions. Say if you've got a couple of units of Immortals raising some banners on some home objectives, still being able to shoot would be pretty handy, and sometimes you can have vehicle units doing actions for certain other objectives. This one could be pretty handy if you are using an Eternal War mission that needs you to do actions. Overall though, not one of the strongest I think. Next up we have Protocol of the Ventral Stars, which is a nice little increase to range damage output, and I think that this one will be taken quite a lot as one of the first couple of ones as a result. This one is the Mephrit one, who already get additional AP on their weapons when they're within half range, and it's going to make their shooting within half range exceptionally murderous. For the other dynasties that have to choose, they have the option of wound rolls of 6, making the attacks AP better by 1 for any ranged attacks. That could be pretty nice on a big unit of Gauss Flayers for example, making a whole load of attacks AP -2, or maybe on some Tesla weapons. Or if your opponent has quite a lot of light cover on the go, you can choose the second dynastic protocol, which means if you're within half range, then the opponent doesn't get any benefit of having cover on their saving throw, though they would still get any other benefits of cover, such as the -1 to hit from dense cover. I'd say that this one's one of the stronger ones. I would typically pick the first dynastic protocol against most enemies. Having a little bit extra AP on shooting attacks is no bad thing whatsoever. Unless you're going very heavy in melee, I'd be tempted to take this either turn 1 or turn 2 as a result. It's going to make Mephrit shooting very scary with both those benefits, in addition to the decent ones that they already have. Next up we have the Protocol of the Hungry Void, which is the melee one, and unsurprisingly the Novok dynasty get both parts of this. The first directive is really quite similar to the shooting part. Basically any unmodified wound rolls of 6 improve the armor penetration characteristic of the attack by 1. It's a bit less useful on any of the higher AP Necron combat weapons, like those hyperphase weapons of the Scorpec destroyers, but it could be pretty decent in combination with things like flayed ones who have a flurry of lower AP attacks. I think potentially more useful though is the second directive, which is basically +1 in strength on the first round of combat if the unit were charged or made a heroic intervention. I really like the sound of that quite a lot. This seems pretty excellent on flayed ones or those new Ophidian destroyers, both of whom have fairly low strength characteristics and are massively buffed by this rule. Of course, Novok Necrons are just going to hit ridiculously hard with these two combined. They're already going to get +1 to charge and 1 extra AP on the charge in the new rules. Now on the turn that they use this, they'll also have the chance to get even better AP and also +1 to their strength. I'm not sure I really want to be going up against a whole unit of strength 5 flayed ones. Honestly, I think one of the biggest problems with this one is maybe having to keep a character alongside them. That could actually prove a little bit problematic, unless you have something that can deep strike. Hopefully if that new Hexmark destroyer has the character keyword, then it could actually be a pretty useful, decent thing for providing command protocols. Or perhaps if the Veil of Darkness still exists unchanged, that could be another one to get a character over to buff some units on the other side of the board. We'll have to see how it shakes out when we have the rest of the Codex. Next up we have the Protocol of the Undying Legions, which is the one that the new Zarakan dynasty gets 2 parts of. This one makes your Necron legions just that little bit better at coming back to life. The first one is a small buff to living metal, meaning that you'll regain 2 wounds rather than 1 when you use the rule. It could potentially be a bit more use mid to late game, maybe when you have a couple of damaged vehicles or something. And the second directive is each time you make a reanimation protocol roll for this unit, you can reroll 1 of the dice. Now that could be potentially quite useful, particularly on 1 wound infantry units, where each successful dice roll could get you a warrior back up, and you could potentially be rolling reanimation protocols for a unit several times if the enemy has to shoot several different units at them. In general, it seems to me that you want to use the second one if you had more 1 wound infantry in your army, or use the first one if you have a whole load of big critters or vehicles. In general though, I think that this one might be a little bit weaker comparatively, perhaps unless you're running a whole load of big blobs of warriors, where those rerolls are going to be worth it. Finally, we have the Protocol of the Conquering Tyrant, which is the Sotek one. It's one that we've already seen previewed. The first directive is adding 3 inch to the range of character auras, and also Lord's Will, My Will Be Done, and Rites of Reanimation, all of which are pretty much confirmed not to be aura abilities now, otherwise they wouldn't be specified like this. That one could potentially be useful. We'll have to see just how powerful the auras of the Necron characters are in the new book. Particularly if the Silent King is very good at buffing units, then potentially his auras could be powerful enough to justify having this protocol early. The second directive I'd say isn't quite as helpful. It means the unit is eligible to shoot in a turn in which it fell back, but if it does then you must subtract 1 from the hit rolls. I think my problem with this one is that it might be very useful to have as an ability, but because you can't choose when it's going to happen in the battle and you already have to choose from turn 1, then it won't be exactly a get out of jail free card for your units unless they happen to be engaged on that same turn. Of the two of this one, I think that the aura one just sounds a bit more powerful and reliable. So overall of these, I really quite like the Hungry Void and the Ventral Stars for buffing shooting and melee, nice uncomplicated buffs that will help. Eternal Guardian could be potentially very useful if a lot of your army is not moving to gain cover, and I think the others maybe just give slightly more minor buffs. Conquering Tyrant could be useful for auras, Undying Legions for a little bit more extra regeneration, and Sudden Storm for a bit of extra movement. Obviously which ones you pick and which order you pick them in is highly going to depend on your dynasty and the composition of your army, and exactly how you're trying to win the game. Overall, I'd say that the rules are okay, certainly some powerful options, but a fair bit of opportunity cost, and it's a bit hard to build around them because they change every turn. I think some armies might really try and build around a really powerful turn with using one of these, where some armies might just use the easiest ones to use and focus on just winning the game with other strategies and not worrying too much about these rules, maybe even just mixing and matching dynasties to put their combat and shooting units in certain powerful ones. So let me know what you think of command protocols down in the comments below. It's really going to be interesting to see how these are used. They are quite a complex set of rules. I'll certainly be covering the Necron Codex when we have more details coming out, so feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more. And if you have been enjoying my videos, I'd just like to mention one way to support the channel, which is my Element Games affiliate link, which is down in the video description. Element Games is a good discount retailer store in the UK, which stocks all of Warhammer 40k products at a slight discount compared with Games Workshop. If you were thinking about ordering in any models in the near future, you could consider clicking through that link and buying through them. If you do, then it doesn't cost you any more whatsoever, but a small amount of the money goes to help support Auspex Tactics. It can just be a way to help support the channel on things that you were thinking about buying anyway. In the USA and Canada, I also have an Amazon affiliate link, which works very similarly. Again, if you just click through on that and buy literally anything on Amazon whatsoever, then a small amount goes to help support the channel, not costing you any more. Both of those links can be found down in the video description if you're interested. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.